Thank you everyone for joining us today. I am Saima Abbasi, Go Green Wilmette's board member. Our topic today is thinking about trees as part of our community's infrastructure. And it is my honor to introduce our panelists today. Lydia Scott is our presenter and keynote speaker. She is the director of the Chicago Region Trees Initiative, a coalition of organizations working together to improve the health of the urban forest and quality of people of life for the people who live in the urban and suburban areas. She is an expert in her field and is well respected nationally for the work she is doing to protect and preserve our urban trees. Under her leadership, Chicago Region Tree Initiative has compiled the largest data on urban trees in the country. Her work involves topics such as urban forest composition, stewardship, increased forestry, professionalism, equity, and climate change. Also, after Lydia's presentation, we are going to have Kevin Sorby, who is Wilmette's forester since 2003. Kevin works with the Engineering and Public Works Department and is responsible for the management of over 17,000 Parkway trees. He is a recognized International Society Arboricultural Certified Arborist and is ISA Tree Risk Assessment Qualified. So thank you. So Kevin is going to be after Lydia's presentation. Kevin will be there to answer some questions which are specific to Wilmette. So before further delay, Lydia, I'm going to turn it over to you. So thanks.
Thank you, Saima. Let me get my presentation pulled up here if I can. Oh, shoot. Because it worked once before, it means that it probably won't work again, but there you go. Okay, I think we're loaded and ready to go. So as Saima mentioned, I was asked to speak about trees as infrastructure and advocacy and policy as they are related to our community's natural resources. And our expertise at the Chicago Region Trees Initiative is trees. So I'll focus primarily on that, but I will talk about some of the other natural resources that we have within our neighborhoods here. So as Saima mentioned, the Chicago Region Trees Initiative is a coalition of organizations. We're working together with our partners to improve the health of the urban forest and to improve quality of life in the Chicago region. And I was pleased to hear that Open Lands Tree Keepers program is coming up on your next opportunity to get together. And being a tree keeper is really a significant opportunity for you in your community to have an impact. And you'll learn more about some of these opportunities as I talk today, but please think about becoming a tree keeper. It's a really great program and a good resource to have. So when we take a look from Google Earth at the city of Wilmette and we dive in a little bit, most of the city is residential, or the village itself is residential. And you can see from this image that including your roads and your sidewalks, you have homes and parking lots and driveways, but you also have a significant tree canopy in your community. And that tree canopy and other natural resources within your community, such as your urban forest, the river, the lakefront, the parks, wetlands, and other natural features within your community really form the structure for your community. So if you imagine looking at this image without the trees, without the grass, and just looking at asphalt and concrete and buildings, it would be a much different place, and certainly probably one where you would not be living. When we look at the urban forest resource in the city of Wilmette, or the village of Wilmette, we say that 45% canopy is present in Wilmette, and that's a relatively high number for the Chicago region. So the Chicago canopy runs from 3% to 66% across a wide range of communities, and that works from the fringes, which are agricultural communities, all the way into the inner city. What we see here on this pie chart, though, is that we have 7% impervious surface, we have 8% roads and rail, 14% buildings, a little tiny fraction for water and bare soil, and then 25%, which is vegetation. And vegetation is anything less than 10 feet in height. So your vegetation and your tree cover are really those natural features that are supporting your quality of life, not helping you get from point A to point B, but making your trip more reasonable, helping to reduce flooding in your basements and your homes, and improving air quality where you live. Another important factor for you to think about is the connectivity and the context within which the city of Wilmette resides. And on this map, this is an oak ecosystem map that shows the entire section of this North Shore. So Wilmette is this section here in the middle that's outlined in red. The dark gray is an indication of where the historic oak ecosystems existed, and they were here in the 1830s when the surveyors walked through. Then in 1939, there were aerial photographs taken, and we mapped the trees at that time, or the oak ecosystems, and you can see the chartreuse green is the 1939 imagery. And so there's a little spattering of oak trees, collections of them. There's another pocket here in Wilmette. But otherwise, all of these oak ecosystems as a collective forest are now gone. Now, that's not to say that we don't have some oak trees or some hackberries or hickories on people's properties, but the connectivity of that forest is gone. And then in 2010, those 1939 pockets have been removed. And so what you have left is really outside the village of Wilmette, and it runs along this corridor here, and you can see that this is sort of an opportunity area for streams and rivers to run through, and so there's an opportunity to connect those back up. So what we're looking for is how Wilmette fits within the context of this system, and are there ways that we can reconnect this oak ecosystem so that we have opportunities for plants and wildlife to continue to migrate and shift, especially as we think about climate change. But it's something for you to think about within the context of where the city or the village itself is located. So we've developed some mapping, and I think I spoke to your group some time ago, and we may not have had these maps at that time, but I'll share that with you now. So when you go to our website, and the email location for this map is at the bottom of this slide, and you'll be able to get to it on the recording afterwards. And I believe they will also be posted in the chat box for you. But this one shows stormwater and flooding. And so if you click on anywhere on the map within here, it'll pop up a little box like this. And for Wilmette, there are several boxes because it's based on census tracts. So for this little box in Wilmette, we see that there's flood susceptibility of 6.75. And that's out of a score of 10, 10 being the most prone to flooding. So this is a little bit higher than the average, but it's still reasonably low compared to other areas in the region. And you can see where the lighter the blue is, the lower the flood anticipation, and the darker the blue, the higher the flood anticipation. And this map helps you understand that the trees, that 45% canopy that you have collectively across the community, is intercepting rainfall, is creating a soil structure that enables the soil to take up more water, absorb more water. And the structures themselves, the trees and the leaves, also take up moisture from the soil to help reduce flooding and stormwater overflow. So there's some benefits there to the canopy that your community is providing with respect to that. Now, not to mention some of the naturalized stream corridors that you may have within your community, or detention areas and those kinds of features that are present within your community to help absorb and pick up some of that extra stormwater, because we know we have that almost 30% impervious surface within Wilmette, where we need to be able to offset that stormwater flow. When we start to look at heat, and heat is becoming an increasingly more significant concern for us with climate change. And they project that it'll be the largest cause of death will be heat-related natural resource or natural disaster deaths due to heat in the next few years. So heat is something that we really have to be focused on. And you can see in Wilmette that it's a yellow in the yellow area, which is the lower temperatures. But when you get to these higher temperatures like the reds, you'll see sometimes as much as a difference of 15 degrees, depending on how dark that color is. And this map to the side explains to you the heat map. So when you look at the priority maps there, you can stop it at any point and you can read the detail on this. But you can see where it shows the heat map here, and you've got this ribbon of blue. I'm looking at the map on the left. That's a corridor, a river corridor, and the blue color indicates cooler temperatures. Well, you look at that same corridor with canopy, which is what this shows, and look at all the trees in that corridor. So we're seeing the significant benefits that trees provide in reducing temperatures within our communities. And you, because you have a relatively high percentage of tree canopy, have a reduced temperature. And because only 30% of your land use is impervious surface, that also helps because impervious surfaces absorb more heat and retain more heat. This is a similar heat map that's a little bit closer in, so you can see how Wilmette fares. You can see on the left-hand side, there's big collections of, and I'm assuming this must be forest preserve property or some kind of parkland here on the west side or the left side of the map. And so you'll see that you've got lots of canopy there, and that also again shows up where you have those lower temperatures, where you have these trees located. You have this area that's more white in here on the left-hand side, and that indicates areas where you likely have more development. There may be some stores or commercial areas in that area, because it also shows that there is lower canopy there, but there's also some opportunities for increased heat. Like look at this bubble right here, where there's a significant difference in temperature between this area and then on the fringes here. And you can even look down, I'm assuming this is like Green Bay Road that runs along here, where you've got that wide ribbon of asphalt that runs through your community, and likely not that many large mature trees on either side of the roadway, possibly a shopping area here with a low canopy where the temperatures are also higher. So it's something to think about when you're managing for natural resource benefits within your community. Where are there opportunities to help improve those temperatures and reduce potential fatalities due to increased heat? Air quality is another factor that we look at with respect to our urban forest and the benefits it provides. So this white blob here in the middle of this map is actually O'Hare Airport. And you can see that that dark purple around the edge is an indication of a high presence of poor air quality, because it goes from white up to a dark purple, with dark purple being the worst. And the interesting point is, or so it's been explained to me, is that O'Hare Airport itself, the actual planes landing and taking off, isn't the greatest cause of pollution. It's the traffic coming and going to and from the airport, and some of the industrial and commercial uses that surround the airport themselves. And you being relatively close, you still have a relatively good air quality, but you're not out of the plume of that air quality challenge that comes in here. So you're not a real light pale pink or white. You do have some challenges with respect to air quality. So the trees within your community, again, are helping to uptake and intercept some of that air pollution to help improve air quality within your community and reduce some of the health implications that may have. We've also evaluated vulnerability, and vulnerability is populations that are low income, have few English speakers, and are high minority. Wilmette is not a vulnerable community. It's a very low with respect to vulnerability ranking. And if you look at some of the communities surrounding here, like you get to the dark purples, there are other communities within close proximity to you or neighborhoods where there are vulnerable populations. And so for us, that's an important consideration, because those are areas where we anticipate they have fewer resources and fewer and lower capacity to plant and care for trees and improve their natural resources. And so it's important for us that provide service and assistance to communities to know where these vulnerable populations are. And especially in this last year, as we've gone through some pretty significant issues with Black Lives Matter and some of the other challenges that we've experienced, we know that there are environmental equity issues. And so we want to be able to address and deal with some of those as best we can. And this entire North Shore area from Wilmette north is a low vulnerability area, has much higher canopy than almost anywhere else in the region. And so you really are very lucky to be where you live. And then finally, when we look at the tree canopy here, you can go in and look at Wilmette again. And these are, remember, these are just plots or parcels within the village of Wilmette. So this one parcel has a canopy cover of 47.71%, almost 48%. So that is an indication to us that there are other areas within your community where there is lower canopy, and we can work with you or help you identify where those areas might be that you might want to focus to reduce some of the challenges that we've already talked about so far. So we rank all those things together, and that gives us a priority ranking. So we have here for Wilmette, we have the priority ranking of very low, meaning that you would not be at the top of our list of communities that we would be working to try to find resources and funding for. And we'll talk about some of the other reasons why that's the case as well. Your canopy is 48% collectively for this plot. And again, remember 45 for the entire community. Your flood susceptibility is 8.5 for this plot. So that's a little bit higher than the one that we saw before that was 6.75. Surface temperature here is 74. And remember again, what I said about our temperatures can range almost 15 degrees depending on where you are in the region. Air quality is 1.8. And your vulnerability ranking is very low, meaning that you have low populations that are considered to be vulnerable populations. So here's a pie chart that shows just 3 benefits that your urban forest is providing and some of the dollar values associated with it. So for that 45% canopy and the 17,000 trees, if I understand what Kevin had presented as to the number of trees that he manages in the village of Wilmette, those 17,000 trees are providing $1.255 million annually of air quality benefits to your community. That those trees are also sequestering annually about $125,000 worth of carbon and intercepting $368,000 worth of stormwater benefits for you within your community. Now, I don't know what Kevin's budget is, but I'm guessing it's not $1.5 million, and we can let him tell you at the end. So the benefits you're getting from these trees are actually, I'm almost positive, pretty significantly higher than the dollar values that are being invested in these trees annually. And so it's important to note that trees as infrastructure within your community are providing many benefits beyond these 3 that I have posted here that have significant benefits to you that are often not recognized or tracked by your community, especially when it comes time to making budget decisions. And I'm assuming that Wilmette is like many of the other communities with the impacts from COVID-19, that many of the financial budget decisions that have been made have been reduced significantly in the community in order to offset reduced sales tax revenues and some other challenges. And so it's likely that Kevin's budget has also been impacted because of that. Now, when you look at as we've talked about Wilmette so far, Wilmette really is in pretty good shape, right? I mean, you have a great tree population or tree canopy cover, that you have a forester on staff, and I'll talk a little bit more about Kevin and his team in a little bit. And you have established a practice within your community that supports these natural resources. But it's likely not you that made those decisions or those things happen. It's somebody in a previous generation or multiple generations ago that has created that opportunity for you. And that means that we, as current stewards of the land or living in these communities, need to be more actively engaged and provide more advocacy for preservation and protection of those resources that we believe are significant to our community and may likely be the reason that you moved to the village of Wilmette. So one of the things that we look at are ordinances and policies within a community. So an ordinance is a legal document that your community has. It's within your village code that stipulates regulations and practices that must be adhered to, that there are typically penalties and fines associated with them in order for your community to function and behave in a way that the values of that community are expressed. Now, policy, on the other hand, is not as strict as an ordinance. It's a guide. It's an adopted action that a government part of your business can present, but it often doesn't have a legal ramification to it. And so when we think about policies, and from a forestry perspective, I like to think of the urban forest management plan that may be guiding the strategy for management of the urban trees in your community as the policy document. And the ordinance is the thing that really carries the weight that has a significant impact if something egregious occurs within the community. So for an example for you is a couple of these are ordinances and one or two, I think the last one is just a policy, but typically there is a tree preservation and or a tree protection ordinance within the community. And those are part of the streets and subdivisions code or other aspects of the code that are more related to existing infrastructure within the community. The zoning code is a code that defines what kinds of development and activities can take place within your community. And the development code outlines how those activities take place. For instance, how many parking spaces are required, how much impervious surface can be installed, how much footprint a building can take on a landscape site. And then you may have a unified development ordinance that looks more collectively at the community from a development standpoint. And then finally, a comprehensive plan that is a guide that provides a pathway for your community as it looks to how different things in your community are being developed. Now, for a community like Wilmette, that is almost completely 100% developed, often what happens for you is that you see teardowns and changes in development practices for sites as a site is designed to be redeveloped into something else. And that's where some of these other, the development ordinance and the comprehensive plan will come into play more actively in your community. So one of the things that we know is that about 70 to 80% of all the land and natural resources within a community are privately owned. And I would guess that it's more towards the 80% end in the village of Wilmette. One of the interesting things is that, and for those of you that are too young to remember this, in 1987, Mr. T, an actor, a television actor, moved into Lake Forest and purchased a property there and cut down 150 mature oaks immediately upon moving in. And at that time, the municipality did not have any regulations in place that controlled what happened on private property. And so we often, as forestry managers, think of the urban forest as a collective unit. So it's not just the trees in your parkway that are providing the benefits to your community. It's in the trees in your backyards and your front yards and your neighbors' backyards and front yards that are actively working together as a unit, creating a resource for your community. And so when we see things like this, where you have somebody that comes in and devastates just an individual lot, it can have direct and profound impacts on the surrounding properties, whether it be only from a property value standpoint, or whether it be from increased flooding or poor air quality or increased heat. Those are all impacts that collectively the neighborhood suffers because of that. So in the village of Wilmette, you have a trees and shrubs on public property section in your ordinance, and it talks specifically about some different aspects within your community that may or may not take place with respect to trees on public land. Now, I must say that I did take a look at your ordinance, and I find it difficult to maneuver around through your ordinance. Typically, what we see is that we'll have one section of the code that talks specifically about trees on public property or public and private property that is housed in one specific section. And there will be an additional piece that talks about trees and shrubs with respect to development in a different section of the code. But overall, all those pieces are together. And I found it a little bit difficult to maneuver through your ordinance. Now, for those of you that are used to maneuvering through it, you'll know where to find the different things that you're looking for and can provide assistance to landowners or individuals within your community who are interested in finding out information. But what you'd like to have is have the ordinance easily readable to people that are looking to understand what they can or cannot do on their property, or how the impacts that they want to create, say, extend their driveway and remove a parkway tree or something like that. This would be where they would find out that information. There is a zoning, obviously a zoning ordinance within your community, and there's a map that's available so that you can actually go online and see this map to identify what kind of development practices are allowable in different areas of your community. So remember, before when we were looking at this corner of your municipality, so there's this section is R1A, and then you can look down below to see what that code means. And there's different ones all across the community, and it will stipulate the size of the lot that can be developed, how much development can take place on it, what kind of building can take place. Is it commercial? Is it residential? That sort of thing. And so the zoning map is really important for you to look at and understand, because if there is, say, a wooded lot that's in your close proximity to your neighborhood or on the other side of a zoning section within your neighborhood, it may allow for the development at some point in time of a commercial area or a store or something like that, that might be in proximity to your home and you're not aware of it. So it's always important to take a look at what the zoning map shows within your community, especially if you live on one of these borders within a zoning area. There is a zoning ordinance within the Wilmette Village Code, and you can look through that to see how that is laid out and what rules and regulations are in place, what's allowable within your community, what's required with respect to landscaping screenings and those kinds of things. So again, if something is built next door to your property or in your neighborhood that you're a little concerned about, what kinds of landscaping is required to screen that development from your view or to help protect your property. And again, what kinds of removals may take place. So if you have a vacant lot within your community that has large standing oak trees on it, is that a property that's privately owned? And if it is, it's likely that it will be available for development at some point in time. If you have an attachment to the trees that are there, or feel like that those trees are providing a significant benefit to you and your home or your neighbors, that's an important thing for you to keep an eye on within your community, so that as projects come up for development, you know well in advance what's happening with that property. This is a section on your website that goes through planning, land use, and development. So most of the decisions that are made within your community are started within the planning department. So, and I'll explain a little bit more about how that works moving forward. That's for land that is going to be redeveloped. For the land that is publicly owned that Kevin and his team manage, those will be all included in your street section of your ordinance, and will lay out specific regulations with respect to trees there. So who controls what goes on in your community? So, and for many of you, you're already very well versed in this. Other communities are not as well versed, but I don't think it hurts to just go through it. There are elected officials that you've elected that are making decisions on behalf of your community. There's an administrative staff that oversees the planning department and the public works department, and likely the community development department and some others. And those are the folks that are really making decisions for what's going on in your community. Then there are regulatory boards, and these are boards that are appointed by your elected officials, so that and for your village board, those are likely elected, but for your plan commission and your zoning board or zoning commission, those are most likely appointed individuals. And those are meetings that have some regulatory control over them, where if a plan comes up for the zoning board and they don't wish to move it forward, or they don't believe it's agreeable to what the zoning regulations stipulate, they can stop a project from moving forward. With an advisory board, that might be your park board, your tree board or commission, or your environmental commission. Those are advisory groups, again, that are appointed individuals. They don't have authority to make rules and regulations, or to, they simply advise the elected officials or your plan commission or your zoning board based on different projects that may come up that they may be allowed to provide some feedback on. I'm not going to go through all the details of this, but what's important for you to understand is there's a process that takes place when a development comes up within your community and where you want to be engaged. And the reason I provide this to you, and the reason I'm talking about it so much, is that we get a lot of calls from residents every week saying, you have to come to our village board meeting and tell our board they can't do what they want to do. You need to stop this development from taking place. And that's really not our role. It's your role as a property owner to step forward and make those pronouncements and to make your feelings known. But what happens typically is there's so much that's gone on before you find out about the project that it's so far down the road that it's very hard to turn back at that point in time. And that's why I say it's important for you to take a look at vacant lots within your community or open spaces within your community, because those are the places where things are going to start to take place. Or if you start to see tear downs happening within your community, being aware of what those practices are and make your feelings known. If large houses are coming in and absorbing entire lots, if that's not something that you want to see take place, you need to step forward and say that. And most of our calls obviously are around impacts to trees. So if there's, we had one community that they were moving a historic building from one side of town to the other. And so they were going to cut down all the trees on the roadway on both sides to get this building down and moved to a different location. So they ask us, can we stop this? Well, no, we can't stop this, but you can certainly step forward and make known to your elected officials that this is something that you don't approve of, or that you would like them to find another solution. And oftentimes there are other solutions. The other thing to look at with respect to any of these issues that might impact your natural resources or the benefits you rely on with respect to your urban forest is requesting that the community do an environmental assessment of the site or the consequences of the plan that will take place. Many times that's not done, and it wasn't clear to me whether your code requires, especially for residential development, a tree preservation plan or a pre-inventory of the trees that are located on the site to determine what kind of impact that policy will have. And often these environmental assessments will look at drainage. They'll look at, how many trees are coming down, the size of the trees, the species of the trees, whether there are any, threatened or endangered species on the site, those kinds of things. What features are going to be located there, and to what extent these features might impact the site overall. Replacement value and anticipated time of replacement is an important consideration. So what I want to explain a little bit more about that is that we need to always be comparing apples to apples, and not all apples are the same size. So when we're thinking about replacing trees, oftentimes we'll hear, well, we've got a really great tree ordinance in our community. It's a 1-for-1 replacement. So if you cut one tree down, you have to plant another tree. Well, the challenge with that is if you're cutting down one 20-inch maple, the benefits that that tree provides annually is about $62. It's intercepting almost 3,000 gallons of stormwater. It's offsetting energy production from shielding your home, but 20 kilowatt hours per year. And 1,300 pounds of CO2 are sequestered in that maple annually. Now, if you're replacing it with a 2-inch maple, which you would never replant a 20-inch maple, or the survival rate on that would be very low, that 2-inch maple, that's a 1-for-1 replacement, is providing $5 worth of benefits. And how long do you think it's going to take for that maple to get up to that 20-inch size? It's likely 10 years or so before, maybe even 20 years before it gets to that size. Now, some communities will have an inch-for-inch replacement. So if you have one 20-inch maple cut down, we have the benefits that we talked about before. And if you plant 10 2-inch maples, which equals that 20%, you're still only at $50 worth of annual benefits for the loss of that tree. It would take 50 2-inch maples to replace that one 20-inch maple for the benefits that it provides. Now, oftentimes, an ordinance will require that the tree removed has to be replaced on that site. And if that's the case, you're not going to have room for 50 2-inch maples. And so we often recommend that a community set up a tree bank or a system by which those resources or funds that come back to the community from the loss of these trees are recouped and being able to be used in other areas of the community to offset those losses. And hopefully it's as close to where the tree losses actually occurred, because you're wanting to replace those lost benefits in the neighborhood where those lost benefits are being experienced. Ordinances can help make decisions. So when we look at this tree-lined street, we think for just a minute about all of the lead in the water pipes that's going on within the Chicago region. And I don't know if Wilmette is experiencing the same challenge or not. But oftentimes what happens is it's the easiest way to do it is just to go through and cut down all the trees on the street, then come in and open trench and replace that water line. And it's important to know that there are alternatives available, whether it be to reline that pipe so that you don't have that lead coming into the water, or whether it be to run a new pipe within the community. And that can be done below ground so that you're not having to remove most of those trees. Now, you will have to remove some of them because you'll have areas where you have to dig a pit, or you'll have an area where the junction box between the line that runs to the house and the line that runs to the water supply source are right underneath the tree. But it certainly wouldn't require complete denuding of the trees on that street. And that's something that's been happening in the city of Chicago for the last several years. And so it's a real challenge because the folks making these decisions are often the water department. And it's much easier for them not to have to deal with the trees, and nobody's thinking about the long-term impacts of the community. And you look at the size of the trees on this street, and they're easily 20-inch trees each. And there's probably, 20 or 30 of those trees. So the loss of those trees is a significant environmental loss to that neighborhood. So how do we work when we have a developed community? And Wilmette is certainly a developed community. We need to be focused on protection and preservation of what we have. How can we protect and preserve the natural resources that we have within our community so that it doesn't change the character of our community and also continues to provide the benefits that we're relying on? Care is particularly important, and you're lucky because you actually have at least 2 foresters on staff in your village that have been trained. They're ISA certified arborists, and they're likely using nationally recognized standards and proper skill to maintain and care for your trees. We recommend that if you do not have an urban forest management plan for your community, that your ordinance states that you require the use of nationally recognized standards for the care and planting of trees within your community, because those trees are providing significant benefits for you. And those 17,000 trees that you have are an expensive resource that's been installed over the last 100 or 200 years that you're now relying on to provide the benefits that you need. The other thing that's important to think about within respect to a developed community is the natural resources that you're enjoying have been funded and developed over years and years and years prior to you getting here, so that you're taking the benefits of that infrastructure that was in place when you moved there and continues to provide benefits to you today. So it's important to preserve and protect what's there. So you are your community's advocate. You are the one who decides who your elected officials are. You decide the values of your community, and you decide the outcomes of your community. You're the one that determines what kind of services and benefits that you have. So for advocacy, what you want to do is you want to promote a strong urban forestry program. You want to have strong public and private property ordinances, and we encourage every community that has a reasonably good ordinance and a professional staff to consider moving forward with a private property ordinance, because the collective resource impacts the entire community. We recommend that you have a strong forestry department with certified arborists, which you guys have, and that you have cross-trained public works staff. So what happens in public works, and I spent 20 years in public works, so I know this well. If you have a storm event, it's all hands on deck. If you have, and that could be pruning down trees, it could be, removing down trees from the middle of the street. It's all hands on deck at that time. And you want to make sure that those that are doing the pruning and impacting those trees know what they're doing, so that that tree has the likelihood of a long life due to no impacts to structural value. And you want the forestry department included at every phase of community decision making. The last thing that you want to have happen is to have a plan come in that's completely developed and ready to go. It goes to the village board, and the village board says, this looks like this is a great plan, and then take it to your forestry department and have them weigh in on it. At that point, it's too late. They need to be involved from the very beginning of these decision-making processes so that they can advocate for your natural resources in your community. It's important to have a tree board or commission that's advising and providing direction and assistance. They can also advocate for your staff. And speaking from a staff perspective, it's very hard to go into a village board and beg for funding and resources on your own. It's much better to go in with a group of residents who can support your request and show the importance to the community overall. It's important to have an inventory. If you don't know what you have, it's really hard to manage it. And a management plan is very important within the community. To have a pruning cycle identified, species diversity is critical. I mean, we know that regionally 32% of all the street trees in the region are maples. And it was only 20% were ash. So guess what happens if something comes through and kills maples? It'll be much worse than what we experienced with our ash losses. So species diversity is critical. Replacement program in place. One that recognizes the full value and potential of the trees that are lost, a protection program so that it's not easy for somebody to come in and just arbitrarily decide to cut down a tree that could have been there for decades, and that specifications, nationally recognized specifications, are in place. So Kevin, I'm sorry, I'm giving everybody your email address so they'll know where to find you. The engineering and public works departments are comprised of a range of services, and engineering is typically within the public works department. But you have the folks that are worried or that are thinking about, your water lines, the safety of your water supply, your transportation, like your roads, your curbs and gutters, those kinds of things. They're focused on buildings and grounds, the streets division, the water and sewer, as I mentioned, vehicle maintenance, and forestry. And Kevin has an additional forester that works with him, Rob Wassley, who I believe is also a certified arborist. And so they're they're resources for you to be able to connect with and to ask them, what can you do to help support the work that they're trying to do within your community? So I have a video, and I'm not going to play it because as soon as I try to do that, everything will fall apart. There is a link to this video here at the bottom of the screen, and this is one that we developed to be shown to village administrators and mayors that reinforces the importance of trees as infrastructure within our communities and the value that they provide to us as a community overall. So I would encourage you, if you have just a few minutes, it's a short video, I think 7 minutes, to listen to that and be able to share some of those resources with your elected officials to support why trees are critical to our communities. It's important for you to know too that the Chicago Region Trees Initiative is here to help you and to help your forestry team in any way that we can. Our goal is to try to help you advocate, but make you be the advocate within your community so that you're more invested and you're more connected to your community. So let us know how we can help you protect this critical resource. And you really are a very lucky community to have such a wonderful place to live. So thank you for letting me talk with you today.
Well, thank you so much, Lydia. I am completely blown away by your wonderful presentation, and it's so Wilmette focused. There's so much information out there. So thank you so much again. And we have questions from our. I'm going to turn it over to Beth Drucker, who is the president of Go Green Wilmette, and she will be moderating our Q&A session. So Beth, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I encourage all of you to add questions to the Q&A because that's how we can make the best use of our wonderful experts here today. Sorry, the Q&A is right on top of everyone. There we go. Okay, so Lydia, that was an amazing, amazing presentation. Thank you so much. Every time I hear you, I learn more and more. I do want to mention that we do have people here from a lot of different communities. Right now, I see we've got the Deerfield group who really wants to know whether or not we're going to be sharing this program, which we are. It should be up on the Go Green Wilmette YouTube channel. You'll be able to find it there by tomorrow about noon. So Catherine Calkins wants to know, Kevin, how soon are you involved in any sort of decision process for either private or public property development in Wilmette?
Yeah, it depends on the situation. I would say residential, it's usually during the proposed residential, when the plans are submitted for, grading and silt fencing, things of that nature. It has an erosion plan, and it does include a tree inventory of the property. Interestingly, just as an example for residential, I got yesterday afternoon, I received a call from a builder. They want to move forward with the site. They wanted to meet on site. They did not appear on site, but I was still able to look at their proposed plans. And one of the stipulations of the plan was is that they needed to check with me because they want to propose removing a Parkway tree. So I went out to the site, I looked at it, and this is not, you guys just watched a great presentation by Lydia. And it's a really nice, without getting too much into the details, really nice Illinois native tree. And so for residential, it is at the proposed residence, they submit their plans. It's usually 7 or 8 pages, 11 by 17. I will get notified of those, through community development or engineering for those. And then for some of the projects, again, residential, where there's going to be significant increase in the footprint of the property, like a 50% or greater square footage on the footprint of the property, those also trigger for me to take a look at those. Now, some of these other things, again, residential, just want to be clear on that. Residential, where people might be doing patios, garages, remodeling a garage or remodeling the siding of a home or something of that nature. Those do not come through me. I might receive notification from concerned members of our community about them, but I'm not usually aware of those until somebody else actually sees them first. So that when it comes to the residential, I guess it depends, how early. It depends on what the scope of the project is, and that really goes for as many of you Wilmettians know now, the central business district that was prior to, I would say I came in not at the pre-planning phase, but more I've been involved as over the last I would say year plus as that whole obviously if you've been downtown or live on Central Avenue or anywhere near Central Avenue from our village hall going east have been impacted by that. So projects like that, I maybe not necessarily at the very beginning, and then of course on the west side, as Lydia pointed out, that's where I'm located, on the west side, and some of those areas are certainly we got a few areas there where it's like freeway ramps and whatnot in our public works building. But what I was going to say is that we got the neighborhood storage project going on, which is we're in the second phase of the three phases of that. Last year, many of you were or had not last year, but over the several years, were involved in working with village staff and going to village board meetings regarding your thoughts on the community playfield, and that was completed last year. Currently, we're working on Hibbard Park, and Hibbard Park, I will say, for any of these, the impact is not just the park or themselves. It actually does extend onto our far, like it kind of spider webs out into our residential streets, which have Parkway Trees. So as Lydia discussed during her presentation, I'm very familiar with some of these site-by-site things where there might be taking out a water service and putting in a new service, and I am involved in those decisions. At the very beginning, I was walking during the design phase with for phase 2 now, which was I think 1 or 2 years ago at this point, as far as taking a look at where structures might be put in for the water sewer projects and stuff, what impact that might have on certain trees, and if you were to adjust, could we save trees here and there. So it really varies, I guess, in a long-winded answer there before all that.
Okay, thank you. For people who aren't from Wilmette, we've had a large project to put underground water storage tanks in, and in many cases, the village has been able to modify the shape and size of the tanks in order to save trees. But that was partially, the village, but it's also was local advocates who said, let's redesign this in a way to protect more trees. One question, Lydia, I noticed there's a hot heat island in Wilmette, clearly is the Eden's Plaza.
Okay.
It's a development with an enormous parking lot
Mm-hmm.
that is half empty, at least most of the time. Do you know of any communities that have required trees in parking areas that help to mitigate the heat island effect?
Yes, and it's becoming more common for them to go back in and remove asphalt as the requirements for parking spaces have gone down rather than up in most communities, with the understanding of improving stormwater flow. We're reducing the amount of stormwater flow and reducing the amount of impervious surface. And so you'll see some of them go back through and retrofit older parking lots by taking out large sections of concrete and planting medians and planting beds within those parking lots. And it used to be that they would be just a narrow little strip about 5 or 6 feet wide. And they've gotten smarter about that now, in that the recognition that that tree, when it gets mature, is going to take up more space and needs more root space and nourishment for its growth. From good soils. And so you'll see that there is retrofitting of parking lots to accommodate that, and some design strategies that have been changed to help improve the health and viability of those trees for the long term.
Okay, thank you. Simon, I want to also mention that I'd like you to be sure to jump in to ask questions either of Lydia or Kevin. Someone who's not, go ahead, Simon.
No, I was just going to mention that, you know, Lydia, in your presentation, you mentioned that 70 to 80% of our tree canopy, which in Wilmette is 48%, is on private property.
That's right.
And you also mentioned that you are advising people to, you know, work towards the private property tree ordinance, working on that. So how can, and I mean, your presentation was very comprehensive, that how, you know, we can go about doing things, but do you have any specific, you know, comments about that? Like for Wilmette, how can they do, preserve our trees?
So I think one of the best things is to have it peer-to-peer. So if your mayor can speak to another mayor who has a private property tree ordinance in place, or your village administrator speaks to another village administrator who has a private property tree program in place, that's the best way for them to do it. Because hearing from somebody from the outside that, like me, who's they know has a vested interest in pushing them to do something, they can hear from their peers about, okay, these are the strong points and these are the weak points of what is going on. One of the challenges when you get more private property tree ordinances in place is that it requires more time of staff. And so the likelihood is that you would need to add an additional staff person or cross-train whoever's doing your water permits to also be able to do tree permits for private property, so that you're not overburdening your staff at the same time. But there are a number of ordinances. We think about 15% of the communities in the region have a private property tree ordinance with them. And so we can help you find those ordinances that you can look through, and you can decide what features of that ordinance your community is ready to adopt. What's important too is that it's not an all or nothing process. So there may be some aspects of a private property ordinance your village is ready to begin to incorporate, and that they can add the other pieces later on. One of the things that is really important when you think about a private property tree ordinance is there's usually some kind of a stipulation that if a tree is removed, there is a penalty or there's a fine imposed for that in order to get those trees back. And what happens typically is those dollars go into a tree bank, like I mentioned before, and are used within the community to improve the canopy, either on that same street or as close to that neighborhood as possible, so that it's helping to reinforce and support the improved continued growth of the urban forest. Another aspect of it that's really helpful is that it provides sometimes opportunities for residents to be able to adopt trees. So if you have residents within your community that would like to plant more trees on their property, there are communities that have ordinances that allow adoption of trees, and part of the cost of the tree is covered from the tree bank, and part of it is covered by the resident, to encourage increased planting on private property. We know, well, 70 to 80% of the trees are located on private property. We also know that the area where there's the most potential for increased planting is also on residential property. So if you can encourage residents to take more active approach to it, that's a really great way to go. And I think early on, you guys have a plant sale coming up. There's an opportunity to purchase wholesale trees and sell your trees at wholesale cost to your residents, so that they can purchase trees when they may not typically be able to otherwise, or even to get their hands on locally native species, which sometimes can be difficult for property owners to get their hands on as well.
Great,
So-
thank you.
Thank you. Kevin, does Wilmette have any kind of a tree bank? I thought that was an interesting idea.
No, we do not.
Okay, so the money when a developer has to pay for removing trees, if they do have to, or a private property owner, does that happen, and where does that money go?
So there is generally for the entire community, anybody who wants to remove a tree 10 inches or larger in diameter, there's a $29 permit fee. And that money is, I'm not sure where it goes. I think it might go into the general fund, but it does not go directly back into the forestry budget.
Okay,
We
so I
see that, I'm sorry, I'm just going to interrupt for just a second, because we see that
Please do,
happening fairly
please do.
frequently when the fees that are being, like for the city of Chicago, for instance, when a developer has to pay thousands and thousands of dollars for replacement of trees in the city of Chicago, that money goes back in the general fund. It never gets back to the Department of Forestry. So it's really important that it be identified early on that the revenues for that tree bank must be used on urban forestry.
Okay, thank you. Sima, make sure you jump in, because I could keep asking questions, but I want to make sure Sima jumps in. So,
Well, yeah, go ahead, Beth.
so Kevin, people from other communities are kind of comparing what they're doing in their communities. I know that our village government is actually looking at our tree ordinance with the thought of perhaps strengthening it. But at this point, if you're a private property owner, is there anything that keeps you, other than a $29 fee, are you allowed to take down any tree on your property, or is there a limit?
Currently, if you wanted to, you're living in Wilmette, you own the property, and you want to remove your trees on your property, you need to get a permit for each of those trees. That's where it's at right now.
Okay, so that's interesting. So there was no Mr. T reaction in Wilmette, partially because that didn't happen. That was in Lake Forest, I think. Andrew Hoffman, he is from Vision Morton Grove. He wants to ask probably Lydia Scott if another suburb represented in our participants want to start working on a tree ordinance, where would they start?
You can contact us. We have a staff person that their responsibility is to work with communities to help them improve their ordinances. He actually just started 2 weeks ago. Our previous person has gone on to work in forestry for the village of or the city of Evanston. But we do have somebody, and it's all free of charge to you. We don't charge anything for this work. So we're glad to help you do what we can to get a good, strong ordinance in place.
Okay, so Amy Downey from Go Green Wilmette just wants to bring up the fact that our oak trees are so incredibly valuable. Most of the people probably know that they provide ecological services that exceed what most trees do. So she wants to know whether you know of any communities that have put special protections for oak trees that are different from, say, a non-native tree, or should we do that sort of thing?
Yes, that is a common practice, that selected species will be given higher priority. So say, for instance, in a community, they may charge $150 per diameter inch for the removal of a tree that is, like a tilia or a maple or something like that, that's considered to be not a lower quality tree, but not not an oak per se. And many of them will specify specifically oak trees as having a higher value, where you might get $250 a diameter inch for the removal of a tree, which also helps to reinforce that the resident thinks twice before they get ready to cut something down, because there is this increased cost. Or can we make our driveway expansion or our room addition slightly different in order to accommodate protecting and preserving that tree on our property?
Lydia, I had a question about the invasive species. I know that I've listened to your, talks before, and actually it was really through you that I learned that how, for example, buckthorn, which is an invasive species, completely changes like the soil composition, and how it doesn't allow oak trees and other trees to grow. And what is your advice for people, what can they do in their for basically this invasive species like buckthorn?
So we have a program called Healthy Hedges that was designed specifically to address the challenges with buckthorn. Buckthorn has a chemical called emodin that its roots and its leaves produce in the soil, which actually is a poison that can cause, like salamanders and frogs and things like that, not to be able to go through their full gestation. It deforms the embryos enough that they can't survive. The other aspect with buckthorn is that it is a high nitrogen producing plant, and the leaves, like if in the fall when you walk through the woodlands, you'll see, and in the spring, the following spring, as you walk through the woodlands and you're walking through now, you'll see oak leaves still in the woodland, but you will not see buckthorn leaves there. Buckthorn leaves decompose very quickly. They have more moisture in them, and the oak leaves decompose much more slowly. And when that happens, you get a faster nutrient flush into the soil of nitrogen. And oaks in particular are sensitive to high nitrogen concentrations in soils, which can prohibit their ability to grow and reproduce. The other aspect with buckthorn and with the Healthy Hedges is we've divided, if you go to our website and just put in Healthy Hedges, there's a brochure that we've developed that's actually, you can open up like a poster and take it with you to the nursery that will show you desirable replacement species. Because one of the things we hear, especially from communities that suffer from heavy infestations of buckthorn, is, well, I don't want to lose that screen between my property and my neighbor's property. That buckthorn's providing a valuable purpose for us. And so if we can direct them to strategically removing, say, the female buckthorn first, so that you get the berries out, and replanting those areas with desirable species, which our poster has for you, and then go back through and then get the other buckthorn out, it gives you a transitional period in order to be able to get rid of that buckthorn in the landscape. We have two companion pieces that go with the Healthy Hedges brochure that are Shrub Guides. One is native species only, and the other one is non-native species, so that if you want to be a purist and only put in native species, you can get that guide. And they're all three guides are available on our website. There's also instructions there in our management section that talks about how to remove buckthorn. And we are glad to come out and talk to groups anytime about the impacts of buckthorn and how to actually get it out of your landscape. We have usually that we bring with us a landscape architect, someone from the forest preserves that can talk about how they manage it, and then direction for you as a homeowner and how to work with your landscaper if you have a landscaper and getting it out of your landscape.
Thank you. Kevin, I wanted to ask you, is there anything that the forestry department in Wilmette is doing about buckthorn?
Yeah, there have been areas that we have cleared out that's within our jurisdiction, as kind of Lydia spoke about. But I do see it, especially along Lake Avenue, as a heavy area where I see it. But you will get it in people's residential areas. And yes, I can attest to, definitely attest to what Lydia is speaking about there. It's one that you don't want to let keep going. It does really take over and change the composition of the soil and allow some of the other more desirable species to take place and stay there. So
Thank you.
Lydia, on related matter, I remember hearing from you a statistic that was mind-blowing. What percentage of the Chicagoland canopy is actually buckthorn?
Well, interesting. We just finished our 2020 census, and the results on that are being released this next week for Arbor Day. And in 2010, when we did the analysis, 28% of all of the trees in the Chicago region are buckthorn. It's much higher in Northern Cook and in Lake County. In Lake County, I believe it's almost 42% of all of the tree species in that county are buckthorn. I can tell you that it's gone up significantly. I can't give you the exact number because I'll be inundated by my communications department if they hear I've given the number out, but the end of next week we'll have the census out, and it's gone up considerably since 2010.
What made it go up considerably?
Well, there's a couple of things. One, we lost a lot of ash trees, so that you have sort of these canopy gaps that are created. Buckthorn itself, by its nature, is a very prolific seed producer. And the birds carry those seeds from place to place. And so what's happened is it continues to creep. We'll be doing some analysis looking at buckthorn from the 2010, where it was in 2010, and then where it's expanded to in 2020 using the updated LiDAR imagery. We won't have that probably till the beginning of 2022. So we can see how much it's creeping. We'll be able to get at the specific numbers through the census that we have, which, as I mentioned, has gone up significantly since 2010. But the prolific nature of its berry production is one of the biggest challenges. And so I think that's the primary reason, but certainly the loss of our ash trees, where you all of a sudden get an opening in your forest. The buckthorn is very strategic about how it just jumps right in and takes over.
Wow. I remember realizing that as you bicycle to the Botanic Gardens from Wilmette, you are bicycling through a tunnel of buckthorn.
A buckthorn, yeah.
Yeah. So Kevin, the group, a Go Green group in Deerfield, says that they don't even have a forester in their community. Do you, as a forester in a suburban community, do you have a network of foresters in other suburbs who are communicating and working together and comparing notes and strategies?
Yeah, I do. It's called the Northeast Municipal Foresters Group, NEMF, and we typically meet once or twice every couple of months. It just depends on how busy it is and what time of year and all that good stuff. But and just generally speaking, besides that, having been doing this just in Wilmette alone for the last 17 plus years, you know, you get to know your neighbors pretty well. And so, yeah, there's a network of people, and I would suggest that, you know, that anybody was it Deerfield? I'm sorry, that mentioned it. Yeah, they can reach out to me, and I can definitely get the information to them regarding Northeast Municipal Foresters Group. It's well worth. It's free, and it's a really good. You got people, you know, urban foresters and people on the commercial side too, that are kind of comparing what's going on. We realize we're not in a bubble here, as kind of Lydia's presentation pointed out. We're all connected. So,
Sure. And I bet you and Lydia would both agree that every community should have a forester.
Mm-hmm.
This is, as Lydia said, this is an asset that we need to value and support with our professional staff like you, Kevin.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I love working at Wilmette. I really do. There's definitely challenges, and but there's some rewards. But yeah, I do wish you know, when a community doesn't have one, I do, you know, wonder if you know, that, like Lydia spoke about, having a commission is, you know, can be really important, as having that group of people that can you know, speak on behalf of the trees. So.
Okay,
I'm sorry, I'm going to interject here for just a second. We have a program called Urban Forestry Basic Training that we provide to anybody that wants to attend, but it's really directed at municipalities that don't have professional foresters on staff. It's a 2-day training. It's coming up actually next week. I think there's a wait list for it, so we're going to offer a second session this spring. It's 2 days of training that talks about basic forestry practices. We also asked the Illinois Arborist Association to come in and talk, especially to those folks that are present, about how to become a certified arborist, how to study for the exam, how to get, you know, participate in the trainings and opportunities to grow your forestry program in your community. And then the second day is on chainsaw safety and how to properly take down trees, because often communities have individuals who may not have been trained to run safely a chainsaw, and we do that in order to help preserve and protect them. But that's an opportunity that's available to them. And one thing I would say is that it's, you know, most public works guys, not most, many public works guys start in public works early in their career, and they just continue to move through. And if you can offer them an opportunity to become certified or trained in something, it gives them another skill set and another feeling of importance and connection to your community, so they're more invested in their job. So for instance, you'll have people that come in and start working in the water department, and before long they're certified to manage the water safety. The same is true with public works overall. If you can get somebody that comes in that has an interest in working in trees, and you can get them trained and as a certified arborist, that's an investment in your staff that's paying you back dividends.
Okay, I've got a question from Ann Nagel, who is a tree specialist in Wilmette. She said that some communities designate heritage or landmark trees with a certain size. Does that help raise awareness or respect for community trees that have been serving and beautifying our communities for decades?
Yes, and many communities have an ordinance that stipulates specific protections to legacy or heritage or landmark trees. And often it's based on size. It's also often based on species. So that's included in there. Sometimes, like in the village of Glenview, for instance, it's not a requirement, but you can register a tree in the legacy program there. That's part of their ordinance. In other communities, once a tree gets to a certain size, it's automatically in a legacy or protected status, which requires the second level of permitting. So if you have a development or a project that comes up that could impact that tree, there's a second level of criteria that has to be met in order to impact that tree in any way.
So, Kevin, I heard that Glenview has a really great tree ordinance, Lydia. Other communities want to know sort of who are there other community tree ordinances that they might want to model theirs after? And then after that, Kevin, I'd love to know whether we have the kind of program of registering heritage trees that Lydia talked about. But first, Lydia, the question about what suburbs have great tree ordinances?
Well, there are a lot of them that have great tree ordinances, and some of it is tied back to the forester on staff who's helping direct those changes in the ordinances. You'll find a lot of the really more strict and more in-depth ordinances are on the North Shore. And again, a lot of that is because of this situation with Mr. T in 1987. I mean, it really was a watershed event. So you'll find like Lake Forest, Glenview, Lincolnshire, trying to think, Northbrook, some of those communities have really strong, good ordinances. There are other, and there's different tiers. So for instance, we're right now updating, we have ordinance templates that we developed and we're updating those right now. They were developed in 2016. So we have the basic level ordinance that we call our bronze level ordinance, where it's an ordinance that's not based on a management plan. So it stipulates right in the ordinance that, you know, we require ANSI standards, we require ISA standards for the planting and care of trees, those kinds of things. The next level up is where it's an ordinance that's based on a management plan. So a lot of those details about specifications and things are located in the management plan. And that way you can update the management plan much more easily than you can an ordinance. It's not, you don't have to go through the same level of approvals. And then the gold level standard is an ordinance that's based on a management plan and has a private property tree ordinance. And again, it's because, and I think you're going to find this becoming much more common over the next few years, because trees play such a critical role in the quality of life for the community. And they're looking at them more collectively as a resource than they used to. It used to be sort of that, you know, there's a tree in the way, we'll just cut it down without even thinking a second thought. It's becoming much more a second thought now about the loss of that tree. And so that's why these ordinances are becoming much more restrictive.
Okay, great. So Kevin, is Wilmette doing anything to tag, not literally tag, but keep record of our oldest heritage trees?
No, there currently isn't a program that's, you know, there isn't a database, you know, loaded with oak trees or hickories or what have you. But, you know, just getting back to a little bit about the tree preservation and protection ordinances, we do stipulate that it's meant to encourage developers and builders to preserve oak trees. For an example, they are given what's called a canopy bonus. So if they are going to preserve you know, a certain size oak tree, whatever the canopy coverage that is calculated, that they work through with their private arborist, they'll get 1.5 times that as far as for maintaining it. It gets to be a little bit more difficult to explain, but the idea, it's in our ordinance along with yeah, I think with definitely American elms and hickories are in there, certain sizes as far as that goes. But yeah, back to your original question, no, there's not currently a heritage or legacy tree reporting program, but certainly something that you know, would love to potentially see.
Do
Yeah.
we have an inventory of our trees in Wilmette?
Well, yes, we do for all our for all the Parkway trees, and that is updated. Even today, I had to update some things for in our pruning programs that finished up. So so if somebody asked me what, what is our number, actually I was just looking at it earlier, because we're at 17,611 trees for our parkways. So yeah, but how many do we have on private property? It was, as far as tree, I mean, it's many multiples of that number. And as pointed out earlier, is most of the land is, privately owned in most, most communities. So.
Okay.
And
Great.
our parkway trees, if I understand it right, they are the ones, their life is not that long. Just because they are, withstanding the rigors of just, salt, and, they're right on the street. And so it just seems like that more and more our private trees, they just need to be like taken care of more. Not that the village trees are, like which are on the parkways are less important, but again, it just looks like that we have to be more, the ordinance has to be in place for the private property trees. What I gather from, today's presentation, Lydia's one, important point is that we really need to take care of our private trees on private property.
So it's now 1:20. I'm going to let Sima wrap up, and she can invite Lydia and Kevin to do a closing statement before we conclude our webinar.
Well, thank you, Beth, for the moderating the Q&A. And and Lydia and Kevin, thank you so much for your valuable time. I know you both are incredibly busy people, and so I really appreciate, and just having the opportunity to speak, for us to hear from both of you, who I know the trees is like focus of your lives. Both of you, it's an honor to have just Lydia, you have, it was so wonderful when we reached out to you a couple of years ago, and we were going to do a tree walk, and you were so passionate, and you were there for the tree walk. So that, every year in the fall we have one, and it was exciting to see someone like you, who is passionate and an expert. And then Kevin, I just want to mention to everyone who's listening that for the tree walks every year, Kevin, gives so much time labeling the trees. I get to spend time, learning about trees in Wilmette. And so Kevin, thank you for doing that every year for us, labeling the trees for us, and your passion, both of you, it's just wonderful to be in your company and learn from both of you. And for our viewers, and thank you, Lydia, for giving the permission to actually record, because I know this, I would encourage everyone to share this video with their friends and family. And any parting thoughts from both of you? Lydia, please, you can go first.
Well, I think it's important to recognize that not every community is at the same place. There are some communities that have been focusing on this for some time, and so you have to come in and sort of advocate for where your values are within your community and help move your community forward. Otherwise, it will stay status quo. And so you need to recognize that you have a voice, and that you can be an advocate in your community to help preserve and protect your natural resources. So that would be my parting tidbit of advice.
Thank you. And Kevin?
Yeah, thanks for having me today. I really appreciate it. Lydia, I thought it was a great presentation as well. Thank you. I just like to hammer home on a couple of things quick here. One thing is to think of trees. Yes, they are infrastructure, but they are an investment, and they do provide the environmental benefits that, as was pointed out during Lydia's talk, that are calculable. So not only do they provide, the benefits that we know aesthetically and for us and for ecologically for birds and butterflies and caterpillars and things that help everything continue on. They are, investment within, in the community, like as if it would be an investment in, adding on to your home or something of that nature. But we're seeing, it's an investment that you can put in the bank as far as the tree is able to, we're able to maintain it and see it grow. It's something that we're all benefiting from. And then I just welcome anybody that's on this today, that's please feel free to reach out to myself or my colleague Rob with any questions that maybe were not answered today, or at any point. I am, my number and my email, that is direct, and it's published publicly, and I don't if I'm here, I will definitely try to help out. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you again, both of you. And I would just like to, share reminders about our upcoming webinars. So our next webinar, as I mentioned before, is on the 27th, and it's going to be on the topic of tree keepers of open lands. And then the other one is on April 28th, and it's going to be a webinar on insects, and a field museum expert will be there to present. And again, this wonderful presentation is going to be on our YouTube channel, so you can go to that probably by tomorrow. And I encourage you to please share it with your friends. Everyone can benefit from this. And then also for our future webinars, you can go to goinggreenmatters.org and you can get more information about that. And so I will wrap it up here. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Take care. Goodbye.
Thank you.